Is lifting with back pain a real mistake? Many of you that have been told you've had herniated discs or sciatica have been told that it's never going to be a good idea for you to lift anything, let alone lifting something off the floor. But is this actually helpful advice, or is this leading you down a path that is more and more difficult to recover from the longer things go on? Long term, this kind of thinking becomes ever more impractical and impossible to adhere to. And so if you're someone who's been caught thinking this, today's video is going to be really helpful to not only set the record straight, but give you some tangible steps that you can use in the back end of the video to start to improve the status quo, the health, the resilience, and the longevity of your lower back. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Michael Fatika, the lead osteopath and spine specialist here at Back in Shape. We help people around the UK and all over the world fix their back pain from home and get back in shape for the long term. And today we want to address this very important mistake that so many are making that only leads to misery and despair when it comes to the prospects of ever being free from back pain. And that might sound a little overstated, but if you've ever spoken to anyone that's been avoiding any kind of lifting for any length of time, you'll see that the risks that start to build, the quality of life that starts to change, can really be so very detrimental. So let's start off by addressing the risks of never lifting again. The two biggest risks or effects of not lifting anything again really come down to the physical, how it physically affects your lumbar spine, the resilience of your body. And secondly, which arguably has more impacts the longer it goes on, or a more severe impact, is going to be the risk up here to the psyche, the mental side of things. The process of maintaining physical resilience in the body in general requires that you're doing things on a daily basis that maintain that physical structure. If you're not partaking in activities that have a degree of load, the body has no need to develop a strong resilience to that load bearing. And so what happens is the less you do, the less your body can do, and the more frequently you find these relapses happen, and the more frequently those relapses are for silly little things, you get to the point where you can't point to any meaningful thing that you actually did. It just keeps on happening for no apparent reason. And the flare-ups seem to be getting worse, and the frequency of those flare-ups seems to be getting closer together. And you're struggling more and more, and you find yourself doing less and less. And so you shrink back away. You just shrink away from doing anything. And you say, well, I can't do that anymore. And then you back off and you say, well, I can't go out and see my friends anymore because I can't face sitting in the coffee shop or whatever it may be, or going for a walk with those guys because it's just hurting my back and I'm suffering for a few days. And then you say, well, I can't drive anywhere because that causes my back to flare up. And so I stop driving. And then I've lost all that social side of things. And then I say, well, I can't do things around the house. So then I say, I can't go up the stairs because I just hurt my back when I go up the stairs. And then so I get a chairlift, and then I could do less and less and less. And that is an extreme thing that's often played out over many, many years, if not decades, of us just shrinking away from these things. And the thing is, it kind of happens so insidiously beneath the radar. We just stop doing these things. And unless we take a step back to evaluate what on earth has happened, these things just slip away. And that's the kind of reality of it. It is just by accident that this kind of deterioration of our body happens. The simple truth is it's completely and utterly impractical to never lift again. The truth will be that if you've got a young child or if you've got a grandchild, you're not going to stand there and as they're running out towards the road and go, well, I'm not going to lift them up. Whatever happens, happens. You're going to do these things. And time again, whether it's kids, grandkids, whether it's stuff in and around the house or in the garden, you are going to lift these things, or you're going to be forced to when you least want to. We are beings that have to interact in an environment. And it might have started out to say, I'm not going to lift anything heavy when I go on holiday, for example, the holiday suitcase. Then it progresses to, I'm not going to pick up the grandkids anymore. Then it progresses to, I'm not going to pick up the shopping anymore. Then it progresses to, I'm not going to pick up the kettle anymore. And we've had people literally post in the comments on some of our social media posts, I'm worried about picking up a 4 pint of milk. And you can raise the questions, okay, how much of that is the physical? How much of that is the mental? But it doesn't really matter because the two are inextricably linked. So to put a full stop in here, if you've had this false belief that you can't lift anything again for your back or it's going to go, you're not going to get through life without lifting your back. And if you try and avoid these sorts of things, it will catch you out eventually. I appreciate and understand that the early part of this video has been pretty dire so far, but hopefully it's just to get you thinking about this sheer preposterous nature of saying I'm never going to lift again. And I do hope that it's not been medical professionals that have told you these sorts of things, because it's just not going to work. Hopefully you can see that already, but there is a better way. And we have to recognize that the human body is incredibly resilient. It's incredibly adaptive. And for all of us, the body is trying to heal, regenerate, and rebuild every single day if only we give it the right impetus, the right guidance, and lead it in the right direction. The not so secret truth is that formalized rehabilitative exercise building strength is the safest way to undo this weakness and vulnerability that might be plaguing you and your lower back. Now, right now, as you're watching this, you might not have the flexibility or the strength to pick something up off the floor. But with time, you can start to build back in your ability to do these things. And you have to remember throughout the rest of this video, which is hopefully going to be really helpful for you in terms of action steps going forwards. You have to think it's not that the thing is too heavy for me. It's that I'm not strong enough or capable enough of that right now. And that last two words is so important, right now, because you can be over time. So what's the strategy? We're going to break it down into 3 steps, and we've got a couple of little tips to help you at the end of this. But we're really going to focus on that simple act of load bearing, picking something up off the floor, because this simple action enables us to start to build back in safely the ability of that spine to bear load, the ability of that body to move confidently, the ability of you to move around, not only in the exercise itself, the movement itself, but in day-to-day life with an ever-increasing sense of control, sense of stability, and sense of safeness around the very movements and activities you're doing on a daily basis. But it's done in the lab, it's done in the exercises, so that when you are doing daily life, picking up the toddler, etc., you have second nature habits that are going to be so much better for your lower back and the way in which you move. Another way of thinking about it is putting that analogy we mentioned earlier on completely on its head. The less you do, the less you can do, so the less you do. Instead of this, the more we do, the more we find we can do, the less we have flare-ups, the more we can do again. And we start to turn a downward spiral into one that goes in the opposite direction. And just before we get into these specific steps, there are actually full video demonstrations. There are tutorial videos all on the website. You can check these out at any time by clicking the link down in the description to go and have a look at the relevant piece. Step number 1 is going to be learning the squat and hip hinge movement. Essentially, getting down onto the ground or close to it to pick something up is going to be a squat and hip hinge or a squat hinge or some combination of both of those. And these are very safe and simple movements that we can adjust to scale down in difficulty and increase in difficulty to find the level that's right for us. Now, for some of these, you can even use supports. You can use bands to help make the exercise easier. Lean on something to make it appropriate to your current level of competence. You need to start out in this step by understanding what your current level is at. How deep can you go through the squatting motion whilst maintaining textbook perfect form without getting any pain and without making any of the simple common errors? In the case of the hip hinge, it's commonly that the middle back or upper back starts to fold forwards, rounding the lumbar spine from the top down. We can also get a little bit of the lower back rounding, in that case, actually the rounding coming from the bottom coming up, which is a little bit more detrimental in many ways. For the squat, it's most commonly going to be the rounding of the lumbar spine with movement leaking into that lower back from the hips. And for both of these, we can use something like the tape test, whereby we stick some tape along the lumbar spine to give us that extra sensor to help us realize when we're making the mistake. But we should also be using something like a smartphone to record us or a family member to record us from the side so we can see if these errors are taking place. Additionally, when finding this pain-free or aggravation-free range, we can use a chair to place underneath our bum. So as we go down, we might touch the chair to understand how low we're going and standardize that range of motion while we're practicing this. We might need a chair with a shoebox on top because we can't actually squat very low. We might need 2 shoeboxes, 2 cushions. But in the process of learning this particular movement, or both of these, we're going to find a range that works. Now with the squat, the chair's going to work. With the hip hinge, on the other hand, having something in front of us so we can lean on it, so we can support our body if we feel like we've gone too far. For some of you, the brain is just not going to compute how to do that hip hinge or how to do that squat effectively. You'll find I just can't do it. My back's rounding. I'm immediately rounding. I'm immediately doing a squat when I'm supposed to be doing a hip hinge. These are common mistakes, but you only understand if you're doing these if you're recording yourself on the side and being careful. And you might be practicing these a couple of times a day because they won't be that strenuous. And I do stress a point here to really hit it home. You are going to be doing squats every single day. You will have squatted to get out of your bed. You will have squatted to get on the toilet seat or off the toilet seat, sit down at some point during the day, etc. So you're already doing these movements. So before you say, oh, I'm worried about doing those, you're already doing them every day. And when you do some of these tests, you realize that actually you're already doing a squat that's deeper than what you can competently do. And that raises all sorts of other questions, which we'll address in another video. So commit firstly in this step to being a student of these 2 movements. We keep it simple. 2 movements, get them right, and find out what you can do in that pain-free, competent range. And just once more to hit that point home, if you're always in pain, it's aggravation free, i.e. the pain doesn't increase whilst you're doing this movement. Step number 2 is to start performing these good exercises as part of a workout. Now, just doing a couple of squats here and there is not going to make any real change to your body. Yes, you're going to improve the technique and find out how much you can do safely, but you're not actually going to be strengthening anything up right now. The real part here is that we need to then take our squats and put them into a workout, take our hip hinges and put them into a workout structure so that we're actually going to trigger our body to change. Something that works really well for a lot of people that we talk about in the program is doing 3 or 5 sets of 10 reps. And you can generally rest for about 30 to 60 seconds between each set. Again, you've got to make sure at this point, when you're doing this workout side of things, that you are in fact observing good technical form. And again, for some of you, it might be helpful to still have that little chair there to make sure that you're standardizing the range when you're doing the squat, or have that bench or stool in front of you when you're doing the hip hinge so that you don't fall or lose your balance or anything like that. You feel confident, you feel safe, you feel like it's an environment in which you can test yourself, knowing that you've got all the support necessary to not get into too much of a costly situation where you do make mistakes. And just before we get into the final step, it's worth noting, right? You're going to make mistakes here. You just are. Hopefully most of the mistakes will be made in step 1, but know that those mistakes can inevitably lead to flare-ups. But you learn something from that mistake, especially if you're approaching this with the seriousness that it deserves. You learn something from messing up your squat. You look back and you say, oh, I did that wrong, or I did that wrong. You don't learn anything, on the other hand, while you're walking the dog and it goes off to chase a squirrel and pulls you and your back hurts. There is no benefit from that. Yes, you need to walk the dog, but you're not actually getting better. So if you're sacrificing doing the exercises because you're worried about a flare-up happening, you need to know that daily life is much more strenuous, especially if you're in this particular situation watching this video. Daily life is much more strenuous for you and much more risky, with no upside in terms of your back health. Whereas when we're doing controlled exercises in this environment, very, very simple, with a lot of care and attention, it's the safest environment with which to make mistakes. And ideally, we don't make the same mistakes over and over again. Now, this brings us to the last and really the most long-lasting step, and that's step number 3, adding load and range of motion. And I stress, this does take time. And we could argue that it's never really a finished process. It's something you need to do for the long term. But this is where the rewards really start to come in. We want to consistently use that workout approach that we've developed in step number 2 to start to find, okay, how much resistance do I need? Maybe I was doing some aided reps, some supported reps, using the chair, as I've mentioned, maybe using a band hanging up onto the door frame or something like that to give us a little bit of extra weight being taken off our body so it's easier on our legs. But now we need to think about building. Maybe we're doing just body weight at a reduced range of motion, a reduced depth, a reduced amount of movement through that squat or hip hinge. Or we might first consider the use of bands. The bands, because for exercises like the squat and the hip hinge, the bands will decrease in their resistance as you get lower down, and lower down in the repetition is where the errors occur, where the mistakes occur. And then we can progress onto something like a dumbbell, something like a kettlebell, something like a barbell eventually, to continue to progress the work we're doing and build strength and resilience into our back. People often ask, these exercises didn't work because I did them once or twice. And it doesn't work like that. Work is, at this stage, our body actually transforming, building new tissue, strengthening those tissues up. And so once we get to this step 3, we need to be doing this for weeks to months for our body to actually change. And we have to also know that the mistakes that we might have been tempted to make back in stage 1 or even stage 2 will inevitably creep back in, or have the chance to creep back in, as we're increasing the resistance and challenge of our repetitions as we get tired. So we must constantly remain vigilant as we're doing these exercises. Take it seriously. Now, I think for most people, actually increasing the weight that you're using is going to be most impactful, most helpful in the short to medium term. But you can also marry up that range of motion, and you want to be trying to improve both from time to time. Turn on the gas a little bit with regards to the weights that we're using, and then pause the weight increase for a little bit, and maybe look at increasing the depth and the range of motion that we're going through to improve the mobility of the hips and the balance and the coordination, etc. And steadily working on both of these levers as we go forwards over time to increase the depth and the strength of these movements, and therefore the structure of our body as well. And you'll find that gradually you work towards that squat that used to be, have your thighs at that sort of angle. Now all of a sudden you're getting really close to that 90-degree squat where you can actually safely and competently squat down to the height of your chair or bed. The biggest warning I've got for you guys is know that you will continue to make mistakes, or have the propensity to make mistakes that you made in step 1 later on. So you've got to always keep that focus. Whenever you've put the resistance up or weight up over time, you will find that the chances, maybe on set 4 or set 5 or towards the end of the 10 repetitions that you're doing, you might start to fatigue a little bit, and that temptation for that back to round a little bit at the bottom starts to creep in, and you just got to remain vigilant for that. As long as you do, you're going to be fine. Wrapping this all up, hopefully you can consider now that the advice to just not lift anything again is completely the wrong thing to do. We all have the capacity to heal, get better, and regenerate. And with the simple 3-step approach we mentioned above for those exercises, you'll find that gradually you get to the point where you can feel confident that if something falls on the floor, if the little one needs picking up, or if you've got to move some stuff around, you actually have a strong enough back, you have good enough movement patterns to be able to deal with that and not have the fear of God put into you. Now, yes, relapses will still happen time and time again as you're going through this. But what you will find is as you start to rebuild this fragile body, you will find that the back gets stronger. The relapses get less severe, they get less frequent, and they get less long lasting. You recover and bounce back from them. And you'll gradually find that as your level of competence and strength starts to exceed the demand on your body from the simple daily life you've got, you start to really separate out these things. I use often with members in the program the analogy of having a nice big trailer that's loaded up with, let's just say, a ton of stuff in there. And at the moment, you've got a little moped, a little scooter, a little, whatever it is, 100cc engine trying to pull that stuff. And it's screaming at you every single day. It can't deal with it. And that trailer is your life, the things that you have to do every day. If you just upgrade that scooter to a Range Rover or a big truck or something like that, it's going to effortlessly pull off and manage the stress and strain of that trailer so much more easily and so much more effortlessly. Problem is, it's not a quick fix and it doesn't happen instantly. But the thing is, it's a lasting fix. So there are a bunch of these silly little stretches and things that you will often be tempted to do. And maybe you've been leaning on those as your back's been getting weaker and weaker. But you've got to turn away from those sorts of things now and start to engage in things that are going to last. Because if you are unwell for a period of time, or if you do have a flare-up, once you've built competence, technical proficiency, and you've built a degree of strength, you keep that in between the flare-ups. You can build on that in between the flare-ups. If you've just done some stretches of your back or something like that, and then you have a flare, everything tightens back up again. You're back to square one. So hopefully this has encouraged you to start down the path of really improving the strength, resilience, and health of your lower back with a way that works. Hopefully you did find this video helpful. If you know anyone else that's struggling and they're, really, really worried about their back, they feel like it's so fragile, then sharing this video with them will hopefully give them that turning point that they really need to start to turn things around. If you do need any help from any of the resources we mentioned, you can always check out the links in the description, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.